Hey there, welcome to the program. Joining me tonight, he advises the federal government on infectious diseases, Dr. Nick Coatsworth, Associate Director of the Monash Institute of Medical Engineering, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, Director of the Doherty Institute, Sharon Lewin, and epidemiologist and public health medicine specialist, Tony Blakely. Would you please make all of them feel welcome?
We've seen in the US the weaponisation and politicisation of mask wearing. In Australia, politician Craig Kelly has raised questions about COVID treatments, including the use of hydroxychloroquine. Media personalities such as Pete Evans have raised questions about the efficacy of COVID vaccinations and vaccination programs more broadly. So my question to the panel is, in such a politically charged environment, what can be done to reach people who oppose the vaccination program, especially given that many anti-vaxxers are well educated and use research to justify their opposition?
Tony.
That's a big question. It's a difficult one. I agree with Nick here that you've got to do the education so that people come along with you. The Kellys of this world, thankfully in Australia, that's a very small part of our political pie, as it were. So at least we've got that position of strength there. I think countries like Australia, a bit more of a social democracy, have done better at not politicising the wearing of masks. See the way New South Wales took it up so quickly. So I don't think we've got as much of a problem there on the politicisation of it. As far as reaching out to anti-vaxxers, that's challenging. My approach to that is that you've got to be straight up. You've got to present those results from the international trials that show the side effects are low. But you also have to be open to the possibility that there will occasionally be side effects and sometimes serious side effects, and be honest about that and thoroughly investigate incidences when they happen. So just finishing up there, you know, it will happen that 10 days after somebody's vaccinated, they'll get an autoimmune disease or something like that, and there'll immediately be questions. In all likelihood, they were going to get it anyway. But you still need to take that seriously, investigate it, and then look for the evidence from all the trials across the world. That's how I would approach it.
Sharon Lewin, how troubled have you... I just want to gauge how troubled you've been about the promotion or by the promotion of hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, I mean, you're just talking about the problems with misinformation and trying to, digest selective digestion of what's out there and making a very strong conclusion about the treatment. Well, Craig Kelly can't prescribe hydroxychloroquine, and you won't get a single doctor around the country that's going to do it, but it does spread misinformation and promote fixed beliefs. And I think we've got to, the government's got to put out clear and consistent communication, doctors and scientists do, but I really think for vaccination we need to embrace community leaders and people that can really influence and speak the same language as the very diverse group that we want to vaccinate.
And
I
just
think
today,
that's going to be very
in the JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, hydroxychloroquine, randomised trial, multiple countries around the world, no effect.
Yeah.
So what's the answer, though, when you have a public figure, like an elected politician, that's spruiking this stuff?
I think I just said it. No effect. Trials all around the world. And that's what the message we need to get out there.
But that's not going to shut up some people, and they have big platforms.
There'll always be the 1% like that,
yeah.
And it's important that they see that 99% of us read the journals or convey that message, and the science says this: no effect of hydroxychloroquine.
Michelle, I think you were trying to get...
Yeah, I think these are great questions, and I think it's normal to be hesitant about vaccination, particularly for adults. It's different for littlies, right? We just make our kids do it and they don't have a choice. So what I would say, though, is just turn it around a little bit and say that delaying vaccination or avoiding vaccination could come with a heavy cost, right? It could come with a heavy cost to you, to your inner circle, whoever that is, and to the wider community. And, there are statistics around that, there are stories around that, there are narratives. So, you need to make a decision and weigh up what is actually in your interest and in the interest of your family, because often it's the emotional context that will motivate adults to do something. For example, if you were to come home and inadvertently infect your parents or your children or your spouse or partner, and they ended up in hospital on a ventilator or they died, you would feel the guilt, right, of that. And I think that that is not to be underestimated, because that's suffering as well. Even though you didn't get sick, you might have, breezed through COVID, but someone else has taken a hit.
Dr. Coatsworth, how do you get that message through to Paleo Pete?
Well, you don't. I mean, honestly, I think...
You just give up on speaking to him?
I think you have to, because there are a certain group who are promoting this message who, it doesn't matter how many times I talk to them, they're not going to change. So what we have to do through shows like this, through the government advertising campaign, through direct conversation, is find the people who are seeking their information from Paleo Pete and divert them or bring them into the credible conversations, the credible news sources that we're putting out through health.gov.au. But also it's going to be word of mouth. It's going to be the successful vaccination rollout. It's going to be demonstrations of safety and effectiveness in our own community. That will build momentum of itself as well.
You're not going to get an invite on his podcast after saying all of that. No. Now, we've sort of started to stray into this territory now of vaccine hesitancy, not quite anti-vaxxers, and there is quite a bit of data out on this, but we've polled our studio audience tonight. The majority of you have responded. It is anonymous, though, I should say. Here's the results. So we've split you up into those that are going to take it immediately, want it straight away, those that say you won't get it at all, tiny fraction of you, 2%, and then 15% of you that say you are hesitant about this. You might wait a bit longer until you know more. That's actually better than some of the public polling on this sort of stuff. But we've got Jasper Kitschke in the audience tonight. You've got someone in your life that sounds like they're vaccine hesitant. Who is it and what are they saying?
So I was chatting to my mum the other day on the phone and she expressed that she was a little bit hesitant about the vaccine, especially for someone in her age group as well. She's in her early 60s.
And did she explain why? Did she tell you where she's getting her information from?
I think, Mum watches the ABC, you know, she reads a lot of the papers and she's up to date with the news, but I think it's just the sheer volume of news out there that it made it sort of, you know, quite difficult, you know, not to kind of have a bit of concern.
So confusion more than being opposed to the idea of it?
Yeah, more this idea of kind of waiting to see,
yeah.
Instead of the idea of, you know, maybe being like a bit of a fence sitter for the moment. Which I imagine are a lot of people as well.
So I do want to get the panel's take, but did you try convincing your mum, or did you?
Yeah, I told my mum that I'd get the vaccine when it's available to me, instead of trying to reassure her that way.
Yeah.
Did
it work?
Well, I'd hope so. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I hope Mum's watching tonight. Sharon Lewin, what do you do for Jasper's mum? How do you get someone across the line? Because clearly pretty well educated, engaged with the information that Nick is saying is key, yet still not convinced.
Well, I think number one, and Michelle alluded to this before, is recognising the concerns. It's entirely reasonable to have a bit of concern because this has all happened so fast, and in a year we've gone from a new virus to a vaccine, and so recognising the concerns is really important. Second, I think the benefits of the vaccine to her are really important to emphasise. So people often do care what the benefits are going to be to her. Benefits to other people are also really important. And I think many vaccine hesitant people really change with more information and also trusted advice. So from friends of hers, I mean, she may think, well, you know, because you're much younger, it will be fine. But, you know, speaking to her friends can have a big impact, speaking to her doctor, who she might trust. And with a bit more time, she may feel very differently about that. And I just want to say about your poll is very interesting because the figures you got from this room are almost exactly of the figures of vaccine hesitancy more broadly for all vaccines. But interestingly, when you about 15% and about 2 or 3% that will never have vaccines, but the recent polls that have been in Australia have shown vaccine hesitancy of about 40%. So it's actually a much bigger number than what we're seeing here.
We're going to do a quick fire round of questions from our audience, and to kick it off, here's Sabrina Woodward. What's your question?
Hey guys, is the vaccine likely to be a once-off that fixes everything, or with all the different mutations and variants, do you see it becoming something like the flu vax where you have to get a new one every year?
Sharon Lewin.
We don't know the answer to that now, but I would predict that we will likely have to have repeat vaccinations, and they may change each year, but it may not be forever.
And that's because of new strains?
It's because of new strains. We actually don't know how long the immunity will last for. We know that we get really good immunity from the vaccines, both AstraZeneca and Pfizer. You make antibodies and you can measure them. They don't decay over 2 months. We don't know if they last for 6 or 12 months and if you need a booster dose. We'll learn that. We'll know the answer to that soon.
Okay, Nick, this is for you from Hyab in South Yarra. Will access to different types of vaccines be up to the patient, or will there be a you get what's available system? Basically, can you choose AstraZeneca or Pfizer?
Well, at the moment, there's only one approved and it's going to be rolled out, and that's Pfizer.
But longer term?
When AstraZeneca comes online, it will really depend. It's more where you are in the queue and then what vaccine is there on the day. Of course, you have the option of saying, I don't want that vaccine, but that will not likely mean someone's going to go out the back and get the other one and give that to you.
Okay.
In the short term. In the longer term, and we're talking towards the end of this year into 2022, there will be a variety of vaccines.
From Eric Jeffries, also for you from Queensland, what's the time between getting your jab and when immunity kicks in?
Well, that's going to vary from person to person, but the most important thing at the moment with the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine is you absolutely get the second dose when you need it to, because it's the second dose that really gets you to the antibody levels that you need for protection.
Okay, and Michelle Ananda-Rajah from Margaret Bain in Macclesfield, Victoria. She says, my cousin in England had problems after her COVID injection, a swollen tongue, muscle pains and off balance. Might we have reactions to the injection in Australia too?
Yeah, so that's referring to anaphylaxis, which has been described with the Pfizer vaccine. So just to put things into perspective, the incidence is really low still. It's 11 per million doses. And essentially, again, they've dispensed 1.9 million. There was a report that was put out. 20 people got anaphylaxis. 17 of those people actually had a history of allergy. So you're more likely to get anaphylaxis if you have a history of some type of allergy. The important thing here is that they were all fine in the end. They had to hang around for about 15 minutes. Most of these things happen in 15 minutes. They're given adrenaline and they're fine. So this is not a reason to avoid having the vaccine. The important thing is to just check the ingredient list and make sure you're not allergic to any of those components.
I'm a doctor in Melbourne. Vaccinations alone are not going to be enough. We still clearly have issues with hotel quarantine. We need input from occupational hygienists, aerosol experts and ventilation engineers. Why is there not national guidance which accepts the reality that airborne transmission is an important mode of spread for this virus and adopts the precautionary principle to protect workers from the airborne spread of this virus with fit-tested N95 masks and other measures?
Nick Coatsworth.
I mean, I think one of the things we've got to be very clear on is that it has been recognised since day zero of the pandemic that aerosols can be generated, and there wasn't really a hospital in the country that would have used a nebuliser in its emergency department after the pandemic was declared. So that is something that's been known, and known for the past 12 months. There is a live debate about the extent to which COVID-19 is transmitted via the aerosol route, via aerosols of COVID-19 that are inhaled.
And but you're shaking your head furiously at this, Michelle.
I'm almost done. We just need to look at the numbers for hotel quarantine, the most successful program in the world. 250,000 Australians returned through hotel quarantine. 3,000 people had COVID-19 in hotel quarantine, and a handful of breakthroughs, which we are learning from every time. And we're in a cycle of continuous improvement where the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee is looking at every single case and looking at the controls that Tony's described.
And announced it today where AHPPC each week is going to start their meeting off on this very question, which is great. However, one point, Nick, is as the droplets we controlled easier because that was 1.5 metres. So the spread that's happening in hotels and other places due to droplets is probably very low now. And that means the remaining transmission is probably more aerosol based, and even more so now with the more transmissible variants coming in. So it's an emerging problem for us that we need to address. I agree with you, actually, that hotel quarantines work pretty well. The problem here is that if one virus gets out and starts another Melbourne second wave, that's a big problem.
There's no debate. There has been clear and compelling evidence from the start of this pandemic. In fact, the Chinese, from the get-go, basically acknowledged that this was aerosol transmission by far, and it was based on their own experience with SARS.
So Nick Coatsworth's wrong?
Yes. Yes, and I've published on this, so it's all good.
I think Nick said there was aerosol spread,
I said
and that's why we're all wearing masks. So there isn't really a big debate.
I'm taking issue on this, that it's a debate, and we're 14 months into this, and we've had real lack of movement on acknowledging the fundamentals of disease transmission. So if you don't acknowledge that this is spread through the air, through a mixture of droplets as well as aerosols, it's a continuum. You can't really slice what a droplet is and what an aerosol is. It's kind of a spectrum. If you can't even acknowledge that, then you can't prevent it. And I can speak about this because I'm a healthcare worker, right? I'm a doctor. I see patients in emergency. I see patients on the wards. And for the first 6 months of last year, it was scary. It was scary. We were getting surgical masks and we were told that that's all you're going to get. And of course, the second wave came into Victoria and healthcare workers started falling like flies. All right, so we had accelerating infections in multiple hospitals as that second wave took out. And in the end, we had 4,100 healthcare workers who were infected. And it took hundreds and hundreds of healthcare workers to get infected for hospitals to then introduce N95 respirators. And fit testing is something I campaigned with along with some colleagues. And, we have now got fit testing. It took till September for that to come in, and I got my fit test done last week. So I'm grateful, but it's not exactly an A+.
I think we probably have to acknowledge, though, that it's only really a debate from the side that thinks that people like me didn't acknowledge aerosol transmission. Now, I'm also a doctor. I'm a respiratory trained infectious disease physician. My wife's a respiratory physician. She does aerosol generating procedures all the time. I agree with every single thing that Michelle said. It is a continuum. There is an element of airborne transmission. There's actually no disagreement here. So what we need to move on to now is getting out there and getting our healthcare workers vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine and then the AstraZeneca vaccine, so that our healthcare system is actually not overburdened in the way that other healthcare systems have been overburdened.
Just to bring it back to the question of the vaccine, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, is there a threat if the South African strain becomes a problem in Australia that this will get ahead of us? Because in effect, we are in a fortress in Australia through the hotel quarantine system. If we're now saying that things are changing such that it's different to what it was when we first began, and although it worked very well for a time, do we actually need to be reassessing whether what we're doing in hotel quarantine works now for the current conditions? We
are reassessing it. Tony mentioned it, I mentioned it, the AHPPC, the chief health officers are reassessing it all the time. But we can't, this South African variant and what we do with our vaccination policy, the World Health Organisation came out today and emphasised that the AstraZeneca vaccine can and should be rolled out for adults over the age of 16. South Africa will be using the AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm sure our regulator is going to be talking to the South African regulator.
Nick, you don't know that. Hang on, South
that.
Africa have actually paused rollout of the AstraZeneca. I haven't heard that they're
South
actually
Africa
using
are actually using the AstraZeneca vaccine. They're going to follow the 100,000 people that next get it. Salim Abdul
within the context of a trial.
Salim Abdul Karim, who's leading that trial, who I know extremely well, will be looking closely at what the effect will be on the 100,000. At the same time, they'll start using Johnson & Johnson. But South Africa are in the middle of a major pandemic with 85% of their strains being South African variant and thousands of people dying a day. So they're going to get the answers on that. And I think what we've got to be have to come to terms with here is the changing information we're going to get. Coronavirus is an RNA virus. It will mutate. It hasn't mutated because of vaccines. I just want to clarify that, because there hasn't been enough. This all appeared before vaccines. And I should say the other major mutation that we've seen far more in Australia is the one that originated in the UK, and we're not seeing any issues with that one, with the vaccine in preliminary.
Yeah, but the UK variant has actually also picked up a particular mutation which is found on the South African variant. This goes back to my earlier point, which is that all these variants are essentially figuring out how to become more
Yeah,
contagious,
that's
and
virology
they're trying
101.
right
Yeah.
and try to evade vaccines. So what I'm saying here is that we have signals coming from clinical trials, Novavax, Johnson & Johnson, and now AstraZeneca, that there may be a problem with the vaccines because they were essentially developed using the original strain, right? But now this has mutated again, and I think we need to stay ahead of the game as a country because there is every possibility that the AstraZeneca vaccine will be rolled out to 10 million adults, and we may still end up being vulnerable when we relax our international borders and allow people in because the variants will come in. So, and I feel that is a population level experiment which has high stakes attached to it, and personally, I'm not comfortable with that approach at all.
Look, let's cut to the chase here. So I think Australia did an amazing job 6 months ago at backing a range of vaccines, and it would be hypocritical to criticise that now. We've got enough of the Pfizer to do most of our first phase of people. Let's get that done. We can then reassess what's happening at that point as to whether then we then bring in the AstraZeneca for the next tranche of people. We've got some time. Let's get the Pfizer rolled out and then we can reassess. At that point, there'll be a decision to be made as to whether the AstraZeneca is still covering enough or not. And if it's on the borderline and we use the AstraZeneca, and I'm the one who gets an AstraZeneca and I need to have another dose next year because it gets updated to cover the next virus wave, the next lot of mutations, that's fine.
But then, Tony, why not just start with a highly efficacious vaccine from the beginning? How about we start with Pfizer or Moderna or Novavax?
But every country's asking that question. That comes right back to Mohammed's question right at the beginning, is if we've got limited mRNA vaccines of high efficacy and other countries are screaming out for them, I think it's not a bad thing.
It's not just mRNA, though. So here's the deal.
Just so our audience is clear, you're talking about Pfizer
and Moderna.
Yeah, Pfizer and Moderna.
So Pfizer just yesterday or the day before announced that they have slashed their vaccine batch production from 110 days down to 60. They also announced, and this was on an investor call, right? So this is reliable, credible evidence, that they were going to be delivering 200 million doses to the US 2 months ahead of schedule.
Fantastic.
So that is fantastic for the United States. But what I'm saying is that this does not sound like a company that is struggling with supply.
But we don't need to decide that tonight or tomorrow. Let's roll out the Pfizer doses we've got, and as we're getting to the point where we need to be deciding what we need to actually use in the next tranche, we can pivot away from AstraZeneca or stay with AstraZeneca.
Okay, that's a great idea. That's what I've been saying.
Can I sort of bring it back to the principles here? Because I'm getting a bit bloody confused, to be honest, and I think if I am, we probably all are. We've got to come back to the objectives of this vaccination program, and that is that we want to prevent severe disease and death. We want to stop our ICUs being overwhelmed. We want to protect our most vulnerable people, and we can do it with the vaccines we've got. And most importantly, we can do it with a vaccine that we're producing on our own shores, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine. Tony's absolutely right. I will likely get the Astra vaccine. You'll likely get the Astra vaccine.
Which is fine, it's great.
We are likely to get another vaccine in 2022 as well. But let's use the vaccines that we've purchased. They do stop severe disease. We will get Novavax. We will have access to other vaccines like the Janssen vaccine down the track. This debate about the variants and looking at every study every day, like it's just going to become confusing for the public, and it needn't be. We're going to have a safe, effective vaccination campaign.
So to that point then, Sharon Lewin, do we face a particularly unique set of circumstances in that the virus is evolving as they do, the science is evolving very quickly as well? You're all saying we've got to question it, we've got to make sure we test everything and look at everything constantly. At the same time, you have a public that wants very clear, simple answers and certainty. So does this pose a problem in that we've got to be actively curious and sceptical to some degree about the science, whilst also accepting what Nick says, it's all going to be okay?
Well, in brief, I think it's all going to be okay. We've got 2 vaccines that are highly effective, and it's an actual medical miracle that we've got those vaccines in under a year. It's extraordinary, and know that they're safe. And I think we also need to recognise that Australia's in a fabulous position, but winter is coming, and we're in a, and winter is coming, and we know that coronavirus likes spreading in winter. So we really shouldn't keep waiting. We've got these 2 vaccines now. We know from big studies and from real-world evidence of rolling them out, they work. We will have Pfizer vaccine at the beginning, but the Pfizer vaccine will come in over 12 months, so we're not going to get those 20 million doses up front. So I think using 2 is completely fine, and that over time we will have other vaccines, as Nick just said. We will have the Novavax vaccine, we will have new iterations of both Pfizer and AstraZeneca. So I think we have to sort of focus on what we're trying to achieve here, stopping hospitals get overrun and getting a large percentage of people vaccinated as we come up to winter.
But Australia has been, really well shielded from, those kinds of losses of, hospitalisations and deaths relatively. It hasn't been smooth sailing, I agree. But, so I think what I'm hearing from my own patients and from some of my colleagues is they're asking me, they'd like the Pfizer vaccine. They understand that there is a difference between an efficacy of 95% and an efficacy of 63%. Okay, it just means you're going to get fewer breakthrough infections, right? 5% versus 40%. There is a significant difference here, and I feel that the Australian public are not being levelled with. And this speaks to this issue of equity. Australia's approach is a hybridised approach where 10 million adults will be getting a highly efficacious vaccine in Pfizer, safe. The other 10 million will be getting a safe vaccine, which is moderately efficacious in AstraZeneca. And what I can't reconcile...
Is it fair to say the public's not being levelled with? I mean, the government, folks like Nick are turning up and answering every single question that's put.
Right, but when I hear messaging like they're highly effective vaccines, that's not correct. There is a highly effective vaccine in Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, and there is a moderately efficacious vaccine in AstraZeneca. So there is nuance here, and I think that needs to be conveyed to the Australian people because, honestly, we are moving now towards recovery. We are looking to open up. We want to do that safely. We want to open up our borders, bring in tourists, travel, commerce, trade. The fundamentals are that we have been on life support in a holding pattern, right, for the last 14 months, but we now need to bring Australia back, get her off life support and get her flourishing again. So, that confidence will come with the most efficacious vaccines for the population, not just for half the population, but for all of them.
Only if we diminish confidence in the actual program. I mean, I think what we've got to be very careful of, and as I said this at the start, is diminishing the confidence in the program by misquoting the evidence about efficacy of the vaccine, that is stopping you getting COVID-19 and stopping you getting severe disease. All of the vaccines stop you from getting severe disease. That alone will allow our community to flourish. You can have a vaccine that's 100% effective. If no one's getting it, your vaccination program is 0% effective. So we need to use the vaccines we've got at the moment. We need to roll them out to as many Australians as we can, and that will actually give us the most successful outcome from this vaccination program.
But Nick, can we not then pivot to Novavax, for example? I mean, this is a vaccine with some really encouraging preliminary data. It's looking like it's 89%, right, based on a clinical trial, 15,000 people, 3 continents. And CSL can manufacture it. So why couldn't we pivot to that? And we have a pre-order with Novavax.
So I think it's a really, really good question. The Novavax is in its latter stages of its phase 3 trials. It needs to be approved by the regulator. CSL's actually making AstraZeneca, not Novavax at the moment. And I don't know what it was like here in July last year and August last year. It was bad. I can't feel how bad it was because I wasn't here. So I'm not going to, as someone who advises the government on public policy, sit here in the knowledge that I have vaccine but not give it to the people of Victoria because I'm waiting for something that I don't personally think is more effective. I don't want to put Victorians or anyone in Australia in that sort of risk. We have a vaccine that will protect us from what happened in Victoria last year. It's Pfizer, it's AstraZeneca, and we're going to use them.
That's all we've got time for tonight. A huge thanks to our terrific panel, Nick Coatsworth, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, Sharon Lewin and Tony Blakely. Please thank all of them.